So what if you could learn absolutely anything faster? Like way faster than you ever thought possible.
Yeah, and we're not talking about some, magic trick or finding a loophole.
Right, not a cheat code,
Yeah.
but actually applying specific, pretty powerful principles that can genuinely change how you process information.
Well, that's the really intriguing idea from the material we're diving into today. It sort of challenges that whole notion that your learning speed is just fixed.
It argues it's trainable, highly trainable, in fact.
Exactly.
So our deep dive today is pulling insights from a YouTube video transcript. It's by a learning coach, Justin Sung.
And he makes a pretty bold claim in it.
He really does. He says these principles helped him essentially breeze through a tough master's program, graduated top of his class.
While studying significantly less than his classmates. Which sounds, well, almost too good to be true.
Right, and apparently it's not just him. Thousands of others have supposedly seen similar results using these same ideas.
So our mission today seems pretty clear then. Let's dig into these principles that Justin highlights.
Yeah, let's pull them out. Try to understand the mechanism behind them. Like, why do they actually work?
And crucially, figure out how you, listening right now, can actually put them into practice. Like starting today.
I have to say, I'm genuinely excited about this one. If there are real, practical ways to become a more efficient learner, I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Absolutely. Sign me up.
So the material basically lays out 3 core principles, it calls them. The effort-time exchange,
Okay.
the omni-learner principle, and the iteration effect.
Effort-time exchange, omni-learner, iteration effect.
Got it.
Let's jump in and see what secrets might be waiting for us here.
Yeah, these definitely seem like they might flip the script on some common ideas about, studying and learning.
Okay, let's unpack the first one then, the effort-time exchange.
All right.
Now, I think the normal thinking here, the common intuition, is probably, if I want to learn faster, I should make the process easier.
Sure, that makes sense on the surface. Like, okay, writing notes is part of learning, so maybe I'll use an AI tool to just do it super fast. Feels like a shortcut, doesn't it?
It feels like a shortcut for the task itself, yeah. But Justin's core point here, and apparently it's backed by research,
Yeah?
is that when it comes to the actual learning, the stuff happening inside your brain, trying to make the task easy often backfires.
Backfires. How so?
Well, learning requires your brain to actively work, to grapple with the material. If you use a tool or some technique just to reduce the effort needed for the task, like taking notes automatically,
Yeah.
you might finish that specific step faster, sure, but you've often just delayed or maybe even complicated the real learning work that needs to happen later on.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So you sped up the action of note-taking, maybe, but you haven't necessarily sped up the mental processing.
Exactly. You've just sort of punted the necessary mental heavy lifting down the road.
Which could end up increasing the total time you need before the information genuinely sinks in.
Precisely. And that's the core idea of the effort-time exchange. It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
It really is.
Putting more effort up front when you're first meeting the material actually saves you time in the long run.
So more effort now equals less time later.
That increased initial effort leads to much more effective learning, builds a stronger memory trace, and gets you to deeper understanding sooner. You don't have to keep revisiting it or spend ages cramming later.
So the real shortcut isn't making the task feel easy.
No.
It's actually making your brain work harder in that moment.
That's the core insight, yeah. And it connects directly to something researchers call the generation effect.
The generation effect. Okay, tell me more.
Well, studies consistently show that when you actively generate understanding, like when you have to wrestle with the information and produce something from it yourself.
An answer or explaining it.
Yeah, or figuring out how it connects to something else. You remember it better, and you understand it more deeply faster. Your brain isn't just passively receiving, it's actively constructing meaning.
Okay, so the practical check for this, according to the material, is asking yourself about your level of struggle.
Right, it's just a simple question to ask yourself while you're learning. Am I reaching the right level of struggle?
And it's not about, like, pointless frustration, right? It's not just making it hard for the sake of it.
No, absolutely not. It's about ensuring your brain is genuinely engaged in that act of processing, the kind needed for that generation effect to really kick in.
Okay, like the example of passive reading versus active reading. Just letting your eyes kind of float over the words feels easy, low struggle.
And it's often low learning, too. Active reading, in this framework, means you're deliberately picking out the important ideas.
Okay.
And you're asking yourself how they relate maybe trying to synthesize them into a bigger picture in your head.
That definitely sounds like more effort, more struggle.
It is. But it's helpful struggle. It activates that powerful generation process, and it saves you time later because that first pass was actually effective.
Or the note-taking example you mentioned earlier. Being a human photocopier, just mindlessly transcribing.
Right, versus actively thinking about, okay, what information here is truly important? How can I phrase this in my own words? What structure makes the most sense for me?
That decision-making, that active selecting and rephrasing, that is the struggle.
And that's the struggle that builds strong memory and deep understanding. It feels like more work right then, but it pays off massively in retention and cutting down future study time.
And even testing yourself fits in here, doesn't it? The source says one place people often don't struggle enough is when they're supposed to be testing.
That's a great point. Just trying your best to recall an answer before you look it up, even with flashcards or practice questions.
That little act of wrestling with your memory.
That is a key part of effective learning. It's generating the answer from within.
So the big mental shift with this effort-time exchange principle is stop trying to make the learning task feel comfortable.
Yeah, flip that switch.
And instead, deliberately seek out the level of mental effort that actually drives effective brain processing.
Because that's where the real efficiency gain lies.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting for me. Justin's video points out that not all struggle is helpful struggle.
Ah, right. There's a type of struggle that's actually inefficient.
And that leads us straight into the second principle, the omni-learner principle.
Yes. And this one takes direct aim at a very, very popular idea. The idea of learning styles.
Oh yeah, the VARK model. Visual, auditory, read-write, kinesthetic.
That's the one. The whole notion that you have this one predetermined best way you learn, and you should pretty much just stick to that.
I think almost everyone's heard this or feels it, right? Like, oh, I'm definitely a visual learner, or I just can't learn well by listening.
It's super common. And the video is actually quite blunt about it.
What does it say?
It says decades of research have shown that this learning styles model, at least as it's commonly understood and applied, it's basically a myth.
A myth. Really? So you don't have like a unique fixed style you're stuck with?
Apparently not. It doesn't dictate how you must learn effectively.
Okay, but hang on. There is something about how our brains process different types of information, isn't there? Like, aren't visuals genuinely faster for us?
Oh, absolutely. Biologically, the truth is our brains are exceptionally good at processing visual information, orders of magnitude faster than text, for example.
Okay.
But modern education, well, it heavily trains us in reading, writing, and listening. Those become strong habits.
Right.
So the problem the omni-learner principle identifies isn't that different formats exist. It's the habit of relying on only one or two and feeling limited by a supposed style.
So if I feel like I'm a strongly read and write learner, and maybe I avoid looking at diagrams or tuning into lectures because they feel difficult for me, I'm actually handicapping myself.
Exactly. According to this principle, you're creating an unnecessary inefficiency. You're limiting your potential learning speed.
The video gives a university example, right?
Yeah, it walks through a typical scenario. You do some pre-reading, then attend a lecture, maybe there's a lab component, then you do self-study.
Okay.
If you can only learn effectively from the textbook, the reading part, well, you're essentially wasting huge chunks of time in the lecture or the lab or whenever you encounter information in other formats.
Because you haven't developed the skill to learn from those other formats effectively.
Precisely. And this problem only gets worse after uni, right? In the professional world, information comes at you from everywhere, in every conceivable way. Emails, meetings, presentations, data visuals, conversations.
Okay, so the solution proposed is become an omni-learner.
Right, which means becoming someone who can learn effectively from any format.
Even the ones you don't currently prefer or find difficult.
Yes. Developing the skill to extract meaningful understanding, regardless of whether the info is written, spoken, visual, or even experiential, you build proficiency across the board.
And the efficiency gain comes from being able to actually use like 100% of the information that's flowing your way.
That's the idea. You don't hit those walls where you feel overwhelmed or have to delay processing just because something isn't your comfort zone format.
Okay, this makes sense. And the video introduces this magical question for omni-learners.
Yes. It suggests constantly asking yourself, how can I organize this?
Organize. How is organizing different from just, say, understanding it or remembering it?
Good question. According to the material, it's a distinct cognitive process. Understanding is like knowing what the individual pieces are.
Okay.
Remembering is being able to recall those pieces later.
Right.
But organizing.
Yeah.
Organizing is understanding how all those components fit together. Seeing the structure, making sense of the whole thing in your own mind. And maybe even thinking about how you could rearrange or simplify that structure.
Like the messy room analogy in the video.
Exactly. You can walk into a really messy room and understand what specific things are in there. You might even remember where you last saw your keys amidst the chaos.
But it's really hard to use anything efficiently because there's no system, no organization.
And as more and more stuff gets dumped into that messy room, you just feel increasingly overwhelmed. Learning, the source argues, is very similar.
So if you just keep accumulating bits of information without actively organizing them.
It becomes really difficult to access them, connect them, and actually use that knowledge effectively. The time it takes you to mentally organize that information is essentially how long it takes you to truly learn it.
Wow. Okay, so let's apply that. When you're reading, being an omni-learner means it's not just following the text word by word, start to finish.
Right. It's actively reorganizing as you go. Picking out the key points, sure, but then deciding where they live in your own mental structure of the topic.
Like you're building your own internal framework for it.
Exactly. Using the text almost like a database you're querying and interrogating to build your own organized understanding, rather than just passively absorbing someone else's structure.
That sounds like the active reading we talked about with the first principle.
It is. It connects directly. It requires that helpful struggle.
And what about visuals, like diagrams or charts? You don't just glance at it and accept it.
No, you actively engage with it. You try to build it mentally yourself. Maybe you simplify it or group related parts together. You might even critique how it's laid out or think if there's a better way to represent it.
You have to make it your own.
That's the kind of mental work involved. Don't just be content with someone else's finished organizational product. The deep learning happens when you perform that organizational process.
Listening seems like the hardest format for this, maybe because you can't control the pace like you can with reading.
It definitely is a higher level skill. The video suggests note-taking becomes really crucial here.
But not just transcribing everything.
No, not being a human photocopier again. It's more about quickly offloading the key information, capturing it so that you can then take the time to organize it properly later when you can control the pace.
So note-taking buys you time to organize later.
Exactly. Developing the ability to organize effectively while listening in real time comes with practice, and it often builds on having strong organizational skills from more controllable formats, like reading first.
Okay, so being an omni-learner is essentially about gaining the skills to apply that right level of struggle, principle one, to information, no matter what format it arrives in.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about developing versatile processing skills so you're not bottlenecked by the format.
And the video mentions something about learner type as distinct from the style myth.
Yeah, it briefly distinguishes the debunked learning style idea from your learner type, which is more about your current habits, your existing strengths, and weaknesses in processing information.
So understanding your habits is useful.
Right. Recognizing those habits, especially the ones that are actually wasting your time versus the ones that are effective, is presented as a potentially quick way to optimize your personal learning system.
Got it. All right, so we've covered putting in the right kind of mental effort up front.
The effort-time exchange.
And building the skill to handle and organize information effectively from any source.
The omni-learner principle.
Now, for the final piece of the puzzle, the iteration effect.
Yes. And this principle really highlights a common approach to learning, especially in formal education, that's described as incredibly inefficient.
Which approach is that?
It's the pattern of spending a long, long time just acquiring and studying information. Lectures, reading, notes, and then only really testing yourself much, much later, often right before you need to perform, like before a big exam.
Okay, yeah, that sounds familiar. Study, 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 then cram test.
Right. And the video calls this a massive waste of time.
Wow. Like building a whole house and only checking if the foundation is solid right before the open house.
That's a perfect analogy. It is. The effective approach, according to this iteration effect principle, is completely different. It makes learning a continuous cycle.
A cycle of what?
A cycle of forming a hypothesis about the information, getting feedback on that hypothesis, and then refining your understanding based on that feedback constantly.
A hypothesis about how the new information connects to what you already know, how it fits into the bigger picture.
Exactly that. As you learn, your brain is constantly making these little educated guesses, Okay, I think this concept relates to that other one like this, or I think this fits into the overall structure here. You're giving it meaning and context.
And those initial guesses, those hypotheses,
Yeah,
they might be wrong, probably often are, especially at the beginning.
very likely. And that's the critical problem with delaying the feedback, delaying the testing.
Why?
Because if your initial hypothesis about how something fits together was wrong, that misunderstanding doesn't just sit there in isolation. It carries through and potentially distorts everything you learned after that point, which was built on that faulty understanding.
Oh, I see. So by the time you finally test yourself way down the line and find the mistake.
You have to backtrack and potentially correct a whole chain of interconnected misunderstandings. You have to relearn and reorganize a whole chunk of knowledge. That's incredibly time-consuming and inefficient.
So the light bulb moment people talk about, that's not just magic.
Apparently not. It's the moment when a hypothesis gets confirmed. The uncertainty drops away, and suddenly everything clicks into place because you've successfully built that accurate mental model. You see the connections clearly.
Okay, so how do you get to that light bulb moment faster?
According to this principle, you need to generate lots of hypotheses early in the learning process. Don't wait.
And get feedback on them quickly.
Yes. Which brings us back to testing. You need to be testing yourself very early and very frequently.
And the key takeaway here is test to the max.
Exactly. But the purpose of this early, frequent testing isn't primarily to pat yourself on the back and see what you know already.
What is it for then?
It's specifically to find the mistakes, to uncover the gaps in your understanding and identify your faulty hypotheses as soon as possible while they're still small and easy to fix.
So instead of one big test just before the final exam, maybe you build in smaller tests, like at the end of every single learning session, or maybe every week.
That's the kind of rhythm the material suggests. Schedule time for it. And importantly, the tests themselves should challenge you at the level you actually need to use the information. Meaning just testing yourself on simple definitions might feel easy, but it might not reveal if you can actually apply the concept or connect it properly to other ideas. A good test, in this context, makes you struggle a bit to use the information effectively. Don't just test the easy stuff you already know you know.
Okay, that makes sense. And the material talks about an even more immediate form of this testing, micro-retrieval.
Yes, micro-retrieval. This is basically testing yourself immediately after learning a small chunk of something.
Like right after reading a paragraph.
Exactly. Or after watching just a short segment of a video. You immediately try to do something with it. Explain the key idea in your own words. Maybe jot down the main points without looking back at the source material.
Oh, wow. That's like instant feedback, isn't it?
It really is. If you can't do it, if you can't retrieve or explain it right away,
You know instantly that your brain didn't process or organize it effectively enough the first time around.
precisely. You get immediate data on whether you hit that right level of struggle from Principle 1 and whether you successfully organized it, like in Principle 2. If you can't retrieve it, you know you need to revisit that specific piece right away.
Before you move on and start building more knowledge on top of that shaky foundation.
Exactly. It stops the error from propagating. The video also points out this is why professionals often learn really efficiently when they're actually on the job,
How so?
because they're constantly applying new knowledge almost immediately. They have to solve a problem or build something or respond to a situation. And the real world provides instant, often high-stakes feedback on whether their understanding was correct and sufficient.
So they get that immediate application of feedback loop naturally.
Right. And the suggestion is you can consciously choose to replicate that immediate application and feedback loop in your own learning, even outside of a job context.
Wow. Okay. So let me try and bring this all together. Learning faster isn't about making the tasks feel easy.
Right.
It's about putting in the right kind of mental effort up front. That's the effort-time exchange, tapping into the generation effect.
Got it.
Then it's about building the versatility to process information effectively, no matter what format it comes in, by actively organizing it in your own mind. That's the OmniLearner principle.
Right, becoming format agnostic through organization.
And finally, it's about turning learning into a constant cycle of forming and testing your understanding with really rapid feedback loops. Using testing strategically to find your mistakes early, not just to measure your knowledge late. That's the iteration effect, testing to the max.
You nailed it.
Uh-huh.
Those three principles, effort-time exchange, OmniLearner, and iteration effect working together, they offer a pretty systematic way to potentially significantly accelerate your learning process.
It provides a framework, really, for being truly efficient in how you acquire and integrate new knowledge. which is, let's face it, a crucial skill in today's world with so much information flying around.
Absolutely. It really forces you to think meta, doesn't it? About how you learn, not just what you're learning.
Yeah, it shifts the focus. It suggests it's less about some innate talent you either have or don't have.
And much more about adopting a more effective strategy, a better system for learning.
So for you listening, maybe take a second to consider your own current learning habits.
Yeah, are you maybe falling into that trap of trying to make the learning tasks feel easy,
Mm-hmm.
accidentally avoiding that necessary mental struggle?
Or do you find yourself shying away from certain types of information, maybe videos or dense texts or data charts because they don't fit your perceived learning style? Are you limiting your omni-learner potential?
And how often are you genuinely testing your understanding early in the process? And are those tests designed specifically to find your blind spots and faulty assumptions?
It's worth asking. Think about the last time you felt completely overwhelmed trying to learn something new or complex. Looking back now, which of these principles, more upfront effort, better organization across formats, or faster iteration and feedback, which one, if you'd had it in your toolkit then, might have helped you cut through that complexity and feel more in control?
And building on that idea from the source about professionals learning efficiently on the job through immediate application and feedback,
Yeah.
how can you maybe bring more of that real-world application, that rapid feedback loop, into your own learning, even if you're just studying from a book or watching videos at home? How can you test your understanding through applications sooner?
That's a really powerful set of questions to sit with. Some real food for thought there. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into learning faster.
It's always fascinating to unpack these kinds of ideas,
Right.
the ones that can genuinely change how we approach knowledge itself.